Some might have wondered about narrative identity and what that means and what it's related to, and so this is a short explanation of that as well. Narrative identity, the narration means the storytelling and the things you go about telling about what has happened. And the identity, it means that you build your identity on the stories you are telling about yourself, about your surroundings, about life, and that stories that are being told around you. So it's again always a two-way interaction. You have an interaction within yourself to become who you are, and you have an interaction with and from the things surrounding you to adjust to how they are. And in between that, you form yourself and your identity to become able to live between who you want to be and who that society and what that society wants you to be. Sometimes you give yourself up to that society's picture of you and everybody else, and you identify with the story of that society, and so you become it. Others will go the other way and try to make their own narration of who they are in opposition to that society and see themselves as very different. We know this story from the generation gap, as they say, when an old person tells you the story of how his life has been and society and what he values, you will find that certain elements are not the same as you tell yourself and how society tells it today. And so we can see that also between generations, there would be different narrations on how things are or should be, or in which way you identify with them. This is basically what narrative identity is about. So I form myself and my identity by the stories I tell. And this is a word used by Anthony Giddens. I'm not explaining his theory here, but taking some reflections on it. It's based on what you call reflexive behavior. So you always keep thinking about yourself to be able to keep your possibilities open. And when you see there are many choices out there and there is no rules on where to enter, where to get out in the social arenas around you, you will start forming sub narration identity. That means that you have one story about who you are and society and life when you talk about your family. And then this story can differ a lot when you talk about your friends or depending on the social arena you are going into. And in all that, you try to adjust and relate and have a reflexive behavior always to be able to know what you are doing and what kind of arena you are tapping into at that moment. And so your identity can become the sum of different sub arenas that you're part of. Maybe it's always been like that, but it's much more visible in the times we call the modern times. And every society, maybe since the first ones have been calling themselves the modern times because there's nobody else to be modern. They are the most modern of everything, and so we call ourselves the modern society or the new one because that's how we see our position right now in time and space. When we reflect about that and who we are at the same time also deflecting other stories away from us. And if you go and have a trip with your buddies from old times, or maybe a group of elderly people take a bus trip and go and enjoy a long trip, the narration of their identity can become an important issue. They relate to that group, they are part of it, and they reflect on their behavior in it. And that can differ. So the same old man who went on that bus trip, when he went out with the old buddies from work, can have a different way of behaving and also telling the story afterwards because it's a different line of the story in his life. So when he shifts the arena and shifts his behavior, well, he will also have a new narration. He will have a slightly new difference to tell about. Maybe this difference can be very huge, very big. I'm sorry for this throat, but maybe no one is listening, so it doesn't matter. And if someone is listening, I'm sorry again. So that person, that old woman or man who has shifted arena and behavior will also have the shift in the narration of who they are. In that way, their identity becomes more flexible because they can shift it and they can retell it depending on what they have adjusted to or which kind of behavior they have been indulging on. Sometimes we see it very, very much opposite each other, that you might think that this person has an identity split or something. And so you go and see this person, maybe in the room for prayer. It can be a temple or any kind of room where people sit for serious prayer or maybe adjustment to that spiritual achievement they want to get. Can be very, very different when you see them later jumping around in a club or a dance club or wherever they elsewhere go. And you think, well, is this the same person? And can they live with those identities? Some can, some can't. And some does not see the contradiction in it, and some cannot live with it. If you are in one, you should not go in the other. And that's what forms the history and the story of our lives. So it becomes focused on what we are doing and behaving and what arenas we come to. And why we tell our stories is because we understand ourselves more by doing so. And people around you will understand more when they hear your story because they will start relating to themselves. We are basically, as humans, centered towards ourselves and our being in this life. So most people will tell you you are an island for yourself and there is only you and your conscience about the surroundings. Everyone else is not really there. They're inside themselves as well. And when you meet, it's like meeting somebody strange to you and you have to relate to them. When you do so, they become familiar, and when they do so, they become friends and part of what you are doing and who you are and your story as well. But basically, you are alone in your conscience out there and you're trying to figure out who you are, what story you have about yourself. And so by telling that story that you have lived, others would be able to relate to what they think is important and how they can manage to reflect that in and on their own life. This is the reflexive narration of your story. Well, how to do that or how to use it in a context of like practical context? Um, you can tell some stories that makes focus on educating the mind on development, identity. And so we have a lot of kids stories that focuses on this, and that's why it's important to keep telling these stories, because people and kids will start relating to one or two personalities that's been told about, and how they develop and change, how they get over troubles, how they fail, how they think about themselves and other, and suddenly they can identify themselves with a certain character, maybe because they dream of being that character, or because that character really resembles how they feel in real life. So narration of stories gives us possibility to understand, develop our identity as well. It's also a kind of space for dialogue and talk about feelings and how we have experienced things, and is it unique for us or has others also met the same thing, and how do they relate to it? Can they interpret what I'm going through so it's also makes sense for me and for them? So it's a way of also making sense and meaning out of who we are. We know that from the big stories of life, the big narrations of history of the humans and where we came from and our maybe our special culture, our background, country, whatever we are related to, have also this kind of narrations because they keep telling us who we are, what we come from, what our ancestors have been doing, what did they believe in, and what happened to them all the way from thousands and thousands years back, maybe just 200 years back, but it depends on the society and place you are. Anyhow, these big narrations are also helpful to make us understand the small narration, the small narration of our specific life, because then we put ourselves in context of the old times and the old people, the heroes and the foes and the wars and the peace and development, this, how it all went. That's what we call history and we call society education, because then you become part of something bigger, a bigger story in a way. In this process of telling the stories, we become reflexive because we have to think more and more about it, and we start identifying more arenas we have to go in and out of, or maybe try to adjust to, not always because we like it, but sometimes because this is what's available. So the pictures we form about ourselves in these narratives can be positive or negative, and they can change and shift, and they can be the force that keeps holding us together. And that is very important to understand also when we work with kids and youngsters and teenagers and maybe our own kids and the neighborhood we're in, that the stories we tell are the stories that form us. So if you basically tell the story of a society that made it through tough times and made it through difficulties and actually came up on top somehow, uh, that has another effect than telling the story of, well, how everybody actually died, and even though some made it to the top, but most of those we lost cannot be replaced, and our society has always been backward and driven by negative forces and so on. This is a different type of narration than the first one, even though it's the same story. So now you see, narration is not the same as a story, is what you focus on in that story, in that specific arena you are going into, and how you look at it, how it looks at you. And that forms the story in between you. It needs the balance between listening to that story, accepting it, discussing it, and sometimes relating to other sides of it than it is being told or how it is being showed. And so narration becomes a central part of modern life for humans who can feel lost, especially who have lost connectivity with history. This is also something these sociologists have been talking about, saying that, well, many people today, they've cut the bonds to the history. They do not want to be part of that long tradition and history of 1,000 or 2,000 years. They want to form themselves out of a new history, a new story altogether. And so, where to begin and what to look at. And sometimes people just don't know about that history because the education hasn't reached them and they weren't really paying attention because of all the other stuff occupying them when they had the chance. And so they just live out there and they will have to look at who they are. And then the story becomes a very important part of who we are, and the narration of the story, an even more important part. And that's also used in therapy many ways, where people can have trauma or trouble relating. It can be kids as well who have been through a tough experience, to make them narrate that experience, that story, what happened, the tragedy, the fearful things, can make it easier to reflect on, work with, adapt to, get over. And so the same goes when you use the fiction stories. That's what they say. It's not to tell you about the monsters, because we all know there are monsters out there in the world. It's how to deal with them and overcome them. This is what these stories and narrations are all about. So this was short about narration as a way to form your identity and how they really do that in practice. If you want to learn more, I think Anthony Giddens is very good, or else there could be many small excerpts of this on this topic in different school books or books in the library. Have a good day.